Okay, we are live. I am Ryland Warner. I'm an associate attorney here at Joseph and Hall. I'm here with Zach New, the managing attorney here at Joseph and Hall. And we are here to provide you with some immigration updates in the news from around the United States. I almost said the world, but it's not quite the world. Well, my story is a little bit the world. But yeah, Zach, how does it feel that I took the wheel and I'm kind of hosting this right now?
It feels great. I don't like toast. It's all you, Ron. This is going to be a bad news week, everybody. So I guess buckle in.
Sure. Do you want to start with your story, Zach?
Sure, I'll start with my story. It's
All
in
right.
all the headlines, so folks might have already heard about this. DACA. So as people might have heard, DACA has been on the ropes for several years now since Trump tried to rescind it back in 2017. It has been on shaky footing, to say the least. There was a court case in Texas where basically a few states said DACA is totally illegal. We need to get rid of it. Went up to the Fifth Circuit, then went up to Supreme Court, and then Supreme Court said, "Hey, maybe it's not illegal. Who knows? You need to do these various things to rescind it." That was a case called Regents of California. That's what it's commonly known as. Um, because of that, the Biden administration kind of moved forward with something called rulemaking, where they tried to put DACA into regulations rather than just being an executive order like it was originally. There's an issue, though, that a different Texas case, the judge said DACA is illegal and I'm going to enjoin it, meaning I'm going to stop the ability of the Department of Homeland Security to carry out this program. He did say that they can continue to accept initial applications, but they can't adjudicate them, and can continue to accept renewals and adjudicate those while everything's kind of playing out. And then case has been going up the ladder since. So um, we've been anticipating, I suppose, this bad ruling from the Fifth Circuit for a while, and we finally have it. The good news here is that DACA is not gone. The bad news is that it is very, very strongly signaled that it will be gone. The court basically said, if we were just looking at the executive order that put this in place, the memo that put this in place, we would say, nope, can't do this, and we'd send it back to the Department of Homeland Security. Because there was this new rulemaking, though, that happened in the interim, the new program goes in place October 31st. The court said we're going to send it back down to the district court to, I guess, develop the record and send it back up to us. Um, yeah, the reason that it really seems like DACA is on the ropes now, like really pretty significantly, and is probably going to be gone, is they were saying, they couldn't tell based off of the record that they had if the new rule is meaningfully materially different than the policy memo, the memo that was put out that implemented DACA in the first place. I mean, spoiler alert, it's not. The regulations are very similar. It's, it's yeah, not a materially different rule than the initial memo was. So, if I'm going to be using my crystal ball here, what's going to happen is it's going to go back down to the district court. The district court's going to say, this is not different in any way, still illegal. I am striking this down. It's going to get appealed back to the Fifth Circuit. Fifth Circuit's going to say, it turns out it's not any different than the initial implementation of DACA, and so we're going to strike it down again. Maybe it goes up to the Supreme Court at that point. It's hard to say. Sometimes they take things, sometimes they don't. And this is a pretty major case, so I would hope that they would take it, and hope that they would give some real consideration to the interests that are involved here. But it's not a great day for DACA. It's kind of literally a countdown clock has been put onto the program. Some silver linings, I suppose, is that the parties to the litigation, the states that are suing, saying DACA has to go, they're not seeking to end the program immediately. They're not asking for the judge to say all DACA recipients lose their DACA now. they're saying is that the Department of Homeland Security should end the program, should not accept any new applications, and should not renew any new application or any renewal applications. That means that really it's a phase out that they'd be looking for over about 2-year maximum. Um, if I'm crystal balling this and I'm saying that this program's not going to be lasting, that means that it's pretty important if you have DACA to get your renewals in and make sure that you have as much validity on your DACA as possible. That way, if Congress does do something like they really should, you'll have your DACA until that point. I mean, just as background on that, for DACA, there's been these acts introduced, these laws introduced, originally called the DREAM Act, and various iterations of that have been coming out since the mid 2000s. I think there's been about 13 or 14 different iterations introduced by both Republicans and Democrats. So it's got bipartisan support. It's just like no side wants to give the other side a win. But maybe number 15 will actually come through if the program is fully struck down. The opinion as a whole is pretty dumb. I mean, it's not surprising in any way. It's just it's disappointing, I suppose. Not surprising, but disappointing. We'll just keep you updated. Next step is it goes back down to the district court, where they will assuredly say this is illegal, and then it'll come back up to the Fifth Circuit, where they will almost assuredly say we agree it is illegal. I mean, in the opinion, they even are complimenting that judge that made the decision, and his excellent opinion that he wrote. They're also using dated terminology, to say the least. They refer to folks as, quote unquote, illegal aliens. So it's not a great place for this to be heard. There's obviously some bias here, and not a real willingness to look at the issue and the impacts that the case is going to be having. Hopefully, Congress fixes something in the meantime. I guess that remains to be seen, but. For now, that's that. DACA is still here, but its days are definitely numbered.
Yeah, and in addition to people that have DACA reapplying and making sure that they have it for as long as possible. Now, I mean, if you're watching this video, I'm sure you've spoken with an immigration attorney to assess your options for potentially getting a green card one way or another. But if you haven't, or if you know someone that has DACA and you don't think that they have spoken with an attorney about what they potentially could do, it's a good idea to, I mean, even before this decision, it was always a good idea, because DACA itself wasn't a status, it wasn't a green card, it was just a way to get an EAD, aka an employment authorization document. But now, really, I mean, if people aren't going to be able to get even that anymore, if you can find any other way to get a green card or anything else, and hopefully the DREAM Act, something happens there. But if you have another path, or if you're not sure if you have another path, if you just want to talk to an attorney, feel free to reach out to us, and encourage others to reach out to attorneys as well, just to, because sometimes people, they don't realize, but a green card is within their reach. They just need to file the proper paperwork and go through the proper processes. So
I mean, we see that through the employment-based side of the practice. Not super often, but often enough. Depending on when you got your DACA, it could be that an employer is able to sponsor you for a green card and you're able to get it. Sometimes that doesn't work. You got your DACA, maybe you were after your 18th and a half birthday, then that makes things a little bit more difficult. Sometimes people have family members that are able to sponsor them. It's definitely possible. There are definitely options out there, not for everyone, and that's why it's important to have your individual case assessed by somebody who, I guess, can talk through what might be out there.
Yeah. And even if you don't have a family sponsor, even if you don't have an employer sponsor, there are still other periphery options that are available. So don't write it off completely. Talk to an attorney about it. My story today is another very happy story about how. So the fiscal year is measured from October to October of each year. So since we're now on October 6th, the fiscal year of 2020, what is it, the 2021 fiscal year or the 2022 fiscal year? Which one was it?
2022
Okay, it has just started or
just
has
ended. So we're
just
now on
ended.
2022.
Okay. Yeah, so that fiscal year has just ended. So people are now looking at the final numbers for refugees that were admitted to the United States in fiscal year 2022. So if you're not familiar with refugee programs, so I'm sure people have heard of refugees before, but it's for individuals that have been displaced from their native country because of a war, because of persecution, because if they had to live in their home country, they could be murdered, they could be tortured, they could be enslaved for whatever reason. So it's one of the humanitarian routes for individuals to be able to enter the United States. And the United States has agreed to do this with a number of other countries through treaties, where after World War II, they saw what had happened to Jewish people during World War II, and they had decided, countries came together and said, hey, we need to agree to help people that are in situations like the Holocaust or similar situations to that. So it's a great program, and it's one for the greater good of all of humanity. And under the Trump administration, the refugee ceiling, aka how many refugees the U.S. would allow to enter into the country, was cut very, very low. The lowest it had been since this certain program was initiated in 1980, where they started setting the ceilings. But they cut it all the way down to 11,400. Sorry, no, that's wrong. To what was the number then? It was very to 18,000 people is how many refugees the U.S. would accept under the Trump administration in fiscal year 2020. And so that is obviously incredibly low, knowing how many people are in the world that are at danger of being persecuted, of being murdered. That was a very, very, very low number. And it was one of the lowest numbers, like I said, since 1980. It was the lowest number. And as a result of this, a lot of the programs that were aimed at helping refugees had to suddenly cut back. I mean, they could only allow 18,000 people into the United States, so they only needed the staff to serve 18,000 people. And that is cutting back on programs across the world in refugee camps that would help people get into the United States. That is cutting back on programs in the United States itself that would help to resettle refugees in the United States. And I was part of one of those programs, International Rescue Committee. And when we heard that 18,000 number, it caused some definite chaos and fear in the organization of what are we going to do? I mean, our whole organization is dedicated to helping refugees, and now almost no refugees can come in. What are we going to do? So after Biden was elected, that 18,000 ceiling was bumped all the way up to 62,500. So it was more than tripled of how many refugees would be allowed into the United States in the year following the final year of the Trump administration. But despite that tripling, we still haven't seen an increase in how many refugees are entering the United States. In fiscal year 2021, there was less than 20% of the amount of refugees that would be allowed into the United States that actually entered into the United States. And part of the reason is because there were restrictions put on to refugee camps regarding COVID. And part of the refugee process is having an interview, a one-on-one interview with someone to assess their refugee story and see whether or not they qualified for the status. And under COVID, uh, they stopped that interview entirely. Even though there were other methods of potentially doing that interview, you didn't have to do it in person. We could have figured out, sent some iPads out and had some remote interviews, or even just put some plastic between people. And I'm sure we still could have figured out a way to conduct those interviews, but nevertheless we didn't until the Biden administration, 7 or 8 or 9 months after they came into power, finally lifted that restriction on not having in-person one-on-one interviews. And so the result of that was, even though he had raised the ceiling of refugees allowed into the United States, it was still such a small amount of refugees that entered the United States. And now that we are done with fiscal year of 2022, we still see that there are very, very few refugees entering the United States, when the Biden administration has again increased the ceiling for how many refugees should be allowed in. We're up to now 125,000 per year should be allowed into the United States. But around 20% of that is coming into the United States. And we can't blame it on COVID anymore. I mean, I'm sure somewhere there are still COVID delays happening in terms of refugee camps, and maybe they are still limiting interviews, but they shouldn't be, according to the Biden administration. And so why not? What is going on still? Why are we still not getting refugees into the United States? We have no shortage of international crises happening around the world. There are definitely still refugees out there, people that are being targeted, people that are in danger, that have wound up in refugee camps and should be eligible to enter the United States. And it's just not entirely clear why they aren't coming into the United States. People are saying this is still the effects of the Trump administration, of that very, very tight restriction back in fiscal year 2019 of preventing people from entering the United States, cutting the ceiling down so low, and then the ripple effects of all of the related programs that worked with refugees having to then cut down on their own staffs. And then suddenly, when the ceiling is raised again, well, we can't meet that demand anymore. I'm sorry, but we laid everybody off because we thought that there was only going to be this many number of refugees allowed in. So it's one of these microcosms of what happens, how difficult it is to rebuild a system after it has been shut down and cut down. And it's not so simple as, well, we increased it. We increased the ceiling again. Everything should be fine. No, all of those organizations need to go back and rehire, and we need to restaff, and we need to get all the resources that we had before back in place in order to get those refugees back into the United States. And so it's just so damaging when something like this happens. And even when you have a new president in office, it still damages the program, and those effects linger for years and years. And we'll see. The Biden administration is keeping their refugee ceiling at 125,000 refugees for this upcoming fiscal year. But whether or not we're going to even get over 20% of that, we're just going to have to wait and see. The Biden administration has announced that they are committing themselves to supporting refugee offices internationally, and trying to restaff those as best as they can, supporting resettlement agencies in the United States as best they can. But again, it's hard to build that back up again, especially, who knows what the next president in 2 years will be, and what threat there might be to the system again if it's not Biden in office again. And so building all those things back up is very, very difficult, and it's scary. It's scary for a lot of people out there. So hopefully we get closer to that ceiling, because we know that people need it. And one of the good things, at least, is, I've complained a lot about the treatment of Afghans on this very program, but at least, I mean, we have allowed 80,000 Afghans into the United States. And there are ways that they are working towards getting green cards for people. I mean, nothing official yet. There are just discussions about what might come down the line. And we have helped some Ukrainians get into the United States. Around 60,000 Ukrainians who were displaced from the war enter into the United States. And you know, there have been changes on the treatment of asylum seekers at the border, as there should have been in respect for the treaties that the United States have signed. Of respecting international law and helping to protect people that have been victims of persecution. So don't even want to get into that. But so there are good things that have happened under the Biden administration, but the slow trickle, the very, very low amounts of refugees entering into the United States still just needs to go up. And I really hope that whatever needs to be done is done. And I hope that we can get the program back into place like it was before the Trump administration. But we'll just have to wait and see on that. And hopefully this time we make it stronger. We make it stronger somehow. But we'll just have to wait and see. So, any thoughts on that, Zach? Uh-oh.
I put down. No, I was going to bring up Ukraine and Afghanistan as well. So you hit what I was going to talk about on this. So yeah, no real thoughts. I mean, it's a lot easier to fire people than it is to hire people.
Yep.
When you don't have the resources, you can't do the work. You know,
Yep.
that's kind of what we're seeing really across the board. So
Yeah.
this is happening. It's not surprising, but it's disappointing.
Yeah, for sure. That's why it's important to vote. You might think, well, you know, even if some person gets into office, a different person will be in office later. But you know, those effects linger. Stuff can stay in power. Policies can have these ghost effects far into the future, even after a certain president is gone. It could, who knows? I mean, it could be a decade before we get the refugee program back up to what we want it to be. So, we'll. But but think of the good things. So there's certain good things, and we can always help more Afghans and Ukrainians. But I'm glad that we were helping those that we have helped. So, looking at questions for this week, it looks like we haven't gotten any questions. But if you are seeing this after the fact and you want to ask us questions, you can also feel free to submit questions down into the box below, and we'll answer them after the live feed is over. I know, because I get those questions forwarded to me sometimes, and I'm like, let me figure that out for you. So, but also you can tune in next week and we can give you an answer live on stream. Zach, it was a pleasure speaking with you this week.
Absolutely. I hope everybody remembers me. It's been a while. Who knows when you'll see me again?
No one could forget you.
Enjoy this Facebook Live.
No one could forget you, and I know there are still some people that are convinced that you and Aaron are the same person. So whenever Aaron's on, you're on.
If you don't come on often enough, then people start to confuse your identity. They're like, are you the partner?
All right. Well, until next week. Goodbye, everybody.